Hey everybody, this is Peteaturner, executive producer and host of our Break It Down show. Today's guest is Jeremy Mahugh. Jeremy is a former SEAL. Okay, great, big deal. He's an incredible warrior. We're not really here to talk about that. As he's transitioned, he's moved into something that's much more interesting, and we're digging into this a lot more here at the Break It Down show. He is from the Deliver Fund. Now, the Deliver Fund is one of many organizations working on trying to deal with our human trafficking problem. You have heard about human trafficking. You're likely aware that it's a horrible thing. Wait until you hear Jeremy's story about what it is here in America and how Americans are being directly impacted by this. This is a crazy story. You'll understand why we're going to explore this more so we can all have a better rooting and the ground truth and what happens day to day when it comes to human trafficking. Hey, if you like what we do, or if you're new to this show, here's how you can support us. Go to breakitdownshow.com and you can sign up and register on YouTube to subscribe to the show. You can subscribe on the website, subscribe at Apple Podcast/iTunes. Anywhere you listen to the podcast, subscribing, rating, reviewing. That really is our coin of the realm. Another way to support us is to support the authors, the doctors, the people that come on the show. Go consume their things. Go to their website. The more that people go out and react to the guests that we present, the better it is. Go to thedeliverfund.org and check out what they do and Jeremy as they fight human trafficking. That's how you support us. The more engaged you all are with what we're passionate about, and only if you're passionate about it, that is how you help us. Okay, so that's what I'm asking for right now. Just go and engage with what the guest is promoting or engage with our website, our YouTube presence, those things. So many exciting things are happening. You are not going to believe some of the incredible, incredible guests that we have coming up. All right, one more thing. You know what I'm going to ask you for next? Save the Brave, savethebrave.org. That's our home charity. That's where we put our effort, our time, and our money. All right, here comes Jeremy Mahugh.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This
East.
is Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Peteaturner.
Hey, you've got Jeremy Mahugh from Deliver Fund on the Break It Down show.
And now, the Break It Down show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Yeah, Jeremy is in Dallas. He is a former SEAL, a sniper, an operator, and basically we're not going to talk about any of that. You know, I guess if we were going to say, what's one thing that we should know about being a sniper that we don't know?
I will give you one story just because from the time of going through sniper school, our school is in Indiana, just south of Indianapolis, and I had to go through in the wintertime, which would be okay because I'm from Montana. I didn't think that'd be that big of a pain in the ass. However, our class was long enough that it broke up over the holidays, right? So you had to go and right over Christmas, take a break and then come back. And in Indiana, it just so happens that time of year is cold and wet. It's not just cold, it's the cold and wet. Then you're stalking. So we're doing these stalks for 4 hours and you're crawling around in the grass in the field. And it's like a swamp because it's wet. But now it's like just that temperature where it's not quite freezing. And back then, you know, this is probably like 2002, maybe that I was doing this. And there's not a lot of great gear that we had, but so I'm trying to stick underneath my ghillie suit like a Gore-Tex pant that's tucked into a standard Gore-Tex boot. And sure enough, as I'm crawling through the weeds, feel that cold water start to seep down my leg. And I know that I'm going to be cold, I'm going to be wet for the next couple of hours because you don't want to be the first one to take a shot. Workers have that much more time for you to search you out. So you got to find your position, get set up, and basically wait for some other people to start engaging. And so anyways, that's just a story from training.
Yeah, it's funny.
But a miserable memory.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing I would say about sniping from my own direct experience is if you're a sniper and you take that shot in combat, at least against Americans, and this is why everybody's like, let's go be a sniper. Like all of a sudden, you're the loneliest guy in the world because there's now a battalion of people looking for you, and they're calling in resources and helicopters, and it is a very lonely job once you pull that trigger if you can't boogie out of there. We had a guy in Iraq who was hunting us, and he was shooting people, and he basically couldn't operate safely anymore because every building, every window, there was so much attention focused on him.
he had to go somewhere else. So it's funny, just those kind of things. Like, yes, you're cold and miserable and carrying your own poo, and once you do your job, it's such peril. It's not an ideal job. It is cool, it's sort of like my job, being a spy. Like, it's super cool, but then when you get to the nitty gritty stuff, there's a whole lot of things that are not great about that job.
Right, for sure.
Let's talk about the Deliver Fund. You get out and you get into this, and basically your man pitches you on the idea, and you say, let's sign up and do it, because you're talking about human trafficking. Tell us what you guys do and sort of why it means so much to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Deliver Fund is a nonprofit private intelligence organization. And the reason that we're a charity, a 501c3, is because there is no, I guess I should say what our job is to do is equip, train, and advise law enforcement to go after human traffickers, specifically here in the United States. There's no real budget there. There's no real resources there. So we have to do that as a 501c3 charity so that we can give scholarships and provide technology at no cost to law enforcement to be able to ultimately crush this market. How we got into this, yes, my partner, our CEO and founder at Deliver Fund, Nick McKinley, a good friend of mine. I worked with him actually in Kirkuk, Iraq, is where we first met. And he was a prior Air Force pararescueman, gone CIA operative, special agent. And so we met over there, and, after working together on a few trips, ended up having lunch in DC, and he just kind of told me what he was thinking about, what he was working on. And this was an idea, concept of, he had been seeing a lot of intelligence and information specific to human trafficking, and there's no bucket to put that in. And so there was no reporting system. I mean, you probably same thing. Like, when you come across those things, there's really no place to put it. There's no actionable, robust way to deal with human trafficking, because, again, our tax dollars go for national security things, which means really guns, drugs, and terrorism. Right. So there's no push from society to really have this money be spent on human trafficking. And part of the problem has been is we've also looked at it as like, well, human trafficking is just something that happens somewhere else, like in Cambodia or Thailand, or it's the border issue, and Trump needs to build a wall so that we don't have illegal immigrants being human trafficked across our borders. Like, that's what we think it is. So we had this idea too, I think, when we first started, because we were working internationally and those are the things that we had seen. But as soon as we started looking at it and talking to law enforcement in the United States, we realized what the epidemic actually is. And then you start taking the academic approach to it. Also, you see that dollar for dollar, America, the United States has the largest problem. And it's the American male that drives the market around the world. And more specifically, we have thousands and thousands of traffic victims in the United States. And 85% of those are American citizens being exploited to and by American citizens. And so now we're talking about something where it's our kids, right? So now it's becoming even that much more of a, in my neighborhood issue.
So you're telling me that my perception that it's just people from faraway lands being trafficked is wrong, and that the vast majority of it is here, and you guys are a leading firm in this, and you're sort of also learning this field too, because it sounds like there's a lot of work to do in the discovery process. Is that right?
Absolutely. I actually just had this conversation at a meeting. I was in Florida recently in the last couple of days and met with a guy who is one of you probably know who he was. I won't say his name on here, but he was one of the first CIA high-level people into Afghanistan in that war. Mm-hmm. And this is a guy who has a long legacy. He is a legacy guy from the agency and has literally built a lot of the systems that we use today, including a lot of what we're doing around, open source intelligence. And so this is a guy with a deep background, but mostly all of that is focused in other AOs, right? So
Mhm.
this isn't. So when I'm telling him about what this problem is, and I'm showing him how easily we can look online and we can find sex advertising, and how easily we can say this one is specifically human trafficking, like it meets the definition of forced fraud or coercion, and or it's a minor, which means, like it's a human trafficking case. He was mind boggled. He was like, I had no idea that this is what's happening within our borders to our own people. And so I came from that same mindset, and initially I also told Nick, I said, listen, surely there's some organization, there's some government entity that's already fighting this. And then what you realize very quickly is not only is that not happening, you take within the United States, for example, I mean, who has maybe the biggest hammer? We would say it's probably the FBI. But again, it comes down to, where do your tax dollars go? Within the FBI, that money is spent on guns, drugs, and terrorism. So the human trafficking element of the FBI is, beg, borrow, steal from the other divisions just to try and get some resources so they can fight this issue. And this is a huge problem. And so, we are trying to fill that gap. And one of the really cool ways that we're filling that gap, because at the end of the day, we, just like our previous careers, what do? We find solutions. We see problems, we find solutions. Well, in this, it's not even that we have to recreate this, or we have to figure out a new solution, because there's already solutions we've used in the fight against terrorism and some of these other illicit markets. So we're taking some of those capabilities and again, bringing it here and saying, okay, we know the methodology, a very target-centric methodology in which we can specifically go after the storefront of this problem. And we can do that in a way that's hugely impactful and can curb this market that's otherwise been going exponentially up. So we want to take some of those same methodologies, some of those same technologies and relationships, and even pulling people out of that federal intelligence side who are targeters or analysts, and bringing them over and saying, okay, you already know how to hunt. Now we're just going to retrain you on a little bit different thing that you're hunting, and then ready, set, go. And then taking that and bringing that same capability down to the front edge of the battle, which is law enforcement. And you would be so blown away, as I am constantly, as law enforcement comes through our training classes, at the inadequacy, or the level of which the training that we expect them to have had or think that they should have had, and it's just not the reality. And so they're so grateful that we're giving them this essentially like federal level training. But for example, many of these officers not even shot a simunition gun, right?
Yeah.
So our training course starts out with, we'll have a typically a girl who had previously been a victim and now is an advocate. So she tells her story. She's setting the tone for law enforcement so that they understand, first and foremost, like why we're all here. And then secondly, that there's missed opportunities that law enforcement and society had to report on things that they saw within her story that could have saved her at any of those points. And then as we start to develop the course out from there, we're teaching law enforcement how to do a very robust cyber intelligence piece, because most of these ads are being sold online. So we're doing an open source intelligence piece there. And then in the afternoons, we'll take them over and do the tactical training, which is essentially getting them to the point where they feel confident going in with sometimes 1 or 2 person teams, not a whole SWAT team, but just if they have to act in a moment, they can go in and feel confident going in and going through the kill house, but doing an arrest and rescuing these victims. Because at the end of the day, you and I don't have badges, and we're not the ones to go in and make arrests and rescue victims. Matter of fact, if you were to go do a body snatch of some child who was you thought was being trafficked, that's actually a second-degree felony, right? That is, unless you have the parent with you there. So, I mean, this is the job of law enforcement to do. So it's a matter of giving them the tools to be successful in that job. But just in doing that, like these officers, I mean, we put a little bit of stress on their situation going through the kill house. And I mean, constantly, we're seeing just what low level of training they've previously had. And so we kind of have to dumb it all down and start from scratch. But it's pretty cool to see them take that training on board and then become confident in that. And by the end of this class, they can come in the morning and build a case, go out in the afternoon, do a surveillance piece. And then, if it's in their own jurisdiction, they can actually go make an arrest like that day. And previously it was taking them on the short end 21 days to be able to do that case. So that's a massive leveraging of really, again, those federal kind of assets that you and I are used to being able to see, but like it just never matriculated into our local communities here at home.
You're breaking my brain. It's so
right?
So shocking. So first off, I had no idea the problem was like that. And now I'm thinking, as a counterintelligence guy, I'm always trying to think like the enemy thinks, so that I can try to counter that. And I'm thinking about, okay, you're going to go work big cities where, there's whatever, young girls or whatever. I'm assuming it's young girls that get trafficked. And so these forces, Chicago PD, they don't have spare time. Like you can literally, and I'm not going to tell any anecdotes. You can literally drink and drive in the streets in Chicago, get pulled over by a cop, and they've got better shit to do than pull you in for a DUI because it's fucking Chicago. And I guess, yeah, you're right. Like, how does human trafficking, and then to go hunt for that? I mean, are there task forces like, counterterror? You'll have an FBI guy sitting next to a CIA guy, sitting next to an Army guy, sitting next to a Navy guy. I mean, these task forces are massive, and they're joint. Is the same thing true for human trafficking, or is it kind of pushed in some other category?
That's a really good question, and it's something that only in the last maybe 4 years have we seen there be some federal funding to fund some task forces, if you will. But ultimately, those I believe there's 18 or 19 of those, but I mean, they don't really have their stuff together yet. There's a couple that are doing pretty good. The one that we work the most with is actually in Houston, and they do a beautiful job. And again, they're about 4 years into it, and which is ironically about as old as we, and we're 5 years old, and we started working with them kind of in the first year that we were developing out everything. And the very first training class we did, we invited some of their officers, their top people, to come in and see what we're doing. And so we've been continuing this relationship with them. But they are a good model for the rest of the country, but they take the local, state, and federal and dump that all into a bucket. Say, look, for these 5 counties, this region, we've got everything from the local vice police up to the U.S. attorneys, and everything in between. So it's a very seamless piece. If they're going to go out and do an operation, they already know that the prosecutors have what they need before they make the arrest. And it's a very good system. And they're continuing to improve that. And they're sending their officers through our training on a regular basis to make that much, to leverage it and make it that much more effective. You also asked about, the age of these victims. And unfortunately, this is maybe the thing that breaks your heart the most. The average age of kids that are coming into this is that 12 to 14-year-old range. And it's really, really tragic that this is where our society has evolved to the point of preying on the most vulnerable at really their most vulnerable age.
Right.
And again, that's an average age, but this is men that are doing this. It's really sick to think that they're actively seeking out a 13-year-old and willing to pay more money to have a 12 or 13-year-old. And at the end of the day, I mean, we've had cases where we have a case with a girl. She was 12 years old when she was first trafficked. Her mom was a heroin addict. She lived in New Mexico, and her mom essentially opened the door, knowingly or unknowingly, to sell her for sex so that she'd get money to buy drugs. This proceeded into a process where this girl was groomed into a situation fairly quickly, in which she also becomes a heroin addict and is really pulled out of that. I mean, the family unit doesn't really exist there because her father had already left her, and her mom said, pretty much disown you. He lived in the same town.
Yeah.
Not 10 minutes away from the hotel in which she was being sold, in which the hotel was complicit to the point where they actually had a key card on the inside of the door, so she couldn't even get out. And this is what was happening in an American town, an American city, to an American girl. And she was between the time of 12 years old to the time of 22, which is the year that we actually stood up. And in that same year, she was one of the first victims that we helped. That 10-year period, she was raped 6 to 20 times a day.
Jesus.
But keep in mind, like, part of that time, she was 12, 13, 14 years old. I mean, the amount of trauma, the amount of abuse, I mean, it is true that you can destroy somebody's spirit. And it's tragic. And so this is something that, why is this not a bigger issue for our society? I think mainly it's because, again, we don't want to think about what's happening here in our own backyard, in our neighborhoods. We want to think, oh, well, there's 2,000 organizations that are fighting this somewhere else. I'll just give some money and I can not have to think about the problem, and they're doing a great job. But you're not looking at what's happening in your own city. And we're right here in Dallas. This is our national headquarters is in Dallas. And I'm actually sitting in the room in which previously the largest website company selling sex advertising used to be in this same office. And it was a company called Backpage.com. They had a massive market share of online sex advertising. But within that, a large percentage of that was human trafficking, again, involving force, fraud, and coercion. And within that, they were found to be complicit in selling minors for sex online. So they actually knew that people were listing ads of minors, and they would actually help them change the verbiage in their ads to not get flagged by the police. So very destructive whole thing. But at the end of the day, we were a primary intelligence source to the feds and to the state attorney general. And then once their headquarters got seized, about 6 months later, we decided that we would move into it, because that's what we do, right? Like it's the same thing we did overseas with taking over some Saddam's palaces and whatever. Right. This is it's turning dark to light. That's what we do. It's a beautiful thing. But that's where we equip, train, and advise law enforcement now, is from this very same place that previously was selling minors for sex online.
Why is it human trafficking if a 13-year-old girl is being raped repeatedly? Why is it not kidnapping or some other kind of crime? Like, what makes it human trafficking?
So the definition is, again, just the basic definition of this is that there's force, fraud, or coercion. However, in the event that it's a minor, a minor is not legally old enough to make the decision to be a prostitute. Therefore, it's human trafficking. So those are easier to prosecute cases in the event of a minor. Once they're 18 over, then it becomes a little bit more difficult, because you have to prove that it's force, fraud, or coercion versus that this person is doing this somehow by choice, right. I.e. like prostitution. So what we see today is that, like, most of women in prostitution didn't just wake up one day and say, I'm going to sell myself for money, right. For whatever reason. There's something else that happened in that childhood or in that history there. So take, for example, the girl that I'm calling Samantha from New Mexico. Well, I just told you part of her story, but she was 12 years old and she was being sold for sex, So by the time we get to her, she's 22, And she's basically just like, F you, I'm not a victim. You can't, like, leave me alone. Like, this is just my life. She's already accepted the fact that her life is that. And now she's 22. So everybody's going to look at her like a heroin addicted prostitute.
Right.
Nobody's going to look at her as a victim of like what has happened over the past, 10 years.
Right. Right. What's the case management piece for her then, for the Samanthas? I mean, obviously you come in the door, and which syndrome does she
So this
not
is a
have?
beautiful, oh yeah. I mean, with her, it was a little bit different case than we normally do because it was such an early on thing for us. And we were so involved with the victim piece. Now there's a lot of other organizations that kind of come in and handle the victim side, where we typically focus on the intelligence to law enforcement, getting the trafficker arrested and successfully prosecuted, and then letting the victim organizations help with those victims. So in this particular case, we did intervene and help her for at least the first couple of weeks. And, she came out of it to the point of, in a lot of ways, she still thought she was 12 years old. We gave her clothes that were adult size clothes. And she was like, didn't think it was right. She wanted to wear clothes that were basically like kids' clothes. Like there are so many trauma, mental blocking things there. But at the end of the day, this is actually maybe one of the happiest, or I don't know if it's one of the happiest stories, but it does have a happy ending because, and I only found this out recently within the last couple of weeks, and here we are 5 years later.
Yeah.
She was, prior to us meeting her, she had been in some programs before. She had actually been taken advantage of in one of those programs, and she'd been arrested before for, prostitution, drugs, and taken advantage in one of those situations. So she doesn't trust anybody. Now, she's a free person. When we get her essentially rescued, she's a free person. So now it's up to her whether or not she goes through the program.
Right.
There's programs available. So over a period of at least 3 years, she was in and out of a program, I think no less than 8 times. But over that period, there was always people there that were available to her. She always had her freedom. And we made sure of that because her trafficker also went to prison. And after this, here we are 5 years later. We were at a conference for the Attorney General's office in New Mexico, and you wouldn't believe who the keynote speaker was.
Oh my goodness!
Right? Yeah. Like, I mean, so what a cool ending. So, here she is 5 years later. She's got the treatment, real rehabilitation to the point where she's stable enough to not only be an advocate, but to be a keynote speaker at Attorney General's conference and really helping other victims. And so, I mean, she's a very smart girl, but to go through all of that trauma and to be able to regain, really her spirit, her soul back is huge. And so there is hope for those victims, but really, why do we even have to deal with that? Like, what's the best prevention model? So there is no Samantha. There is no Samantha being exploited. And ultimately, that's what we focus our efforts at Deliver Fund at, is so that we can invest in taking out the human trafficker so that there are no human trafficking victims.
When you guys are trying to figure out, I guess I have a couple questions. Let's go to the intel side first. So obviously you guys are working with OSINT, but are you also teaching these guys how to do, I mean, there's so many different kinds of intelligence, like, I mean, tactical exploitation at the site of a raid or a prostitution or whatever. I mean, are they learning how to do that as well? Are they doing a mass int approach for this problem? Okay.
Yes, and so those are all things of which we do have to kind of start at a very basic level, and we only have a week, and so we're getting them to the point where they can actively identify and proactively build these cases. And the other really nice thing is we have a platform now that never existed prior to about 3 years ago,
right?
But it's essentially taken the platform the FBI uses as their host investigative platform and taking the same tools that you would use in like Palantir or the mapping and charting of bad guy networks from the intelligence side, and taking that and using all of those tools. So both on the investigative side and the intelligence side, trying to figure out before something bad happens. Combining all this together into one platform that's at an affordable rate that law enforcement can actually afford.
Right.
And they only need a couple of their detectives, their good investigators to be on that building the cases. But now, if one of those detectives is building a case in Dallas, and then boom, it auto associates on a case that is in Orange County,
Right.
where you're at, boom, now even if the officers just didn't want to share that information, the computer knows, the AI algorithm knows, hey, there's more information here. Here's who you need to call to find out what else is involved in this case. And that's a really big deal because law enforcement is so siloed. We in the military and the intelligence agency, we figured out if we're going to fight a war, we've got to figure out how to communicate and get those officers or those people who are working on the front edge of the battlefield to be able to communicate in real time so that information flows. Because if information doesn't flow, problems don't get solved.
Right.
And so that is what we are bringing to the table for law enforcement. So whether they're at a local, state, or federal level, they can be building cases on this platform, have the tools they need to build effective cases that happen in a very short amount of time. And then also at that point, they can just start crushing the market because it's casting that net over the entire country. So
how does a smaller town, a town of say 60,000 people or 30,000, how do they deal with this? I mean, obviously a lot of these towns don't have a hose stroll, right? I mean, so who knows, like the storefront may not be there, but that doesn't mean that there's not a dude off in, the back room on the internet hunting. So how does a small town deal with this? Because they don't have the budget and the manpower to send someone out to a class, do they? Hey, this is Peteaturner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here. And if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it. How does a small town deal with this? Because they don't have the budget and the manpower to send someone out to a class, do they?
They don't. And that's why we exist as a nonprofit, because we can offer scholarships, but also even if we don't train anybody from that small town, we can still have relationships there. And then the other piece of that too, that I think is important, is we're working with the federal side too. So maybe it's somebody who has, from Homeland Security, who has federal jurisdiction in that area. So we can essentially pick the officers who are going to be most impactful in this fight, right? Mm-hmm. And who can have the best chance of getting a successful prosecution. And that's something where, here in Dallas, this is something that we've stood up as what we call the ITAC. It's the International Human Trafficking Analysis Center. And in this very same office, which previously was Backpage.com, now we are becoming the centralized brain of all things human trafficking. So we can push out that intelligence to whoever it needs to be. And we can say, well, we know that if we send it to this local law enforcement officer, they are not going to do anything with it. But we know if we send it to this one, they're going to prosecute it to the fullest extent of the law. So we become that middle piece to make sure that information goes to the right place and actually gets actioned on as well.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So trying to cover that day, but there's no way you guys are big enough to cover down on the whole nation. Is that right? Are you guys focused on metro areas, or how do you get big enough, and where do you need help at?
Well, for sure. That's the deal, right? Is casting that net across the whole country, because the same way we used to do in the, fighting terrorists, we used to try and run around and follow them, and that was not working. So it's a matter of casting the net so that no matter where they go, you just pick up a phone call and you say, hey, that's our goal, is to have, to do this at scale, is to have law enforcement, and again, whose job it is, right? Mm-hmm. And just connecting them and making sure that they have the proper tools. And then we act as that. Yes, we can advise, we can build cases, and we can pass those cases to law enforcement. We can track where these guys are going and let those officers know that this person is coming into their area and has these victims that he's selling. We can do all that, but it just doesn't take the extreme amount of manpower that you really think it would. And a lot of it because it is happening so much online. Now, again, if you look at the old days, especially what we've just commonly referred to as prostitution, you think about like, this is something happening on the street corner, right?
Right.
This is something, like the movie Pretty Woman, right? Like you just
It's
go down to
romantic.
that. Right. It's romantic. You drive down on that maybe red light district and pick up a girl, and you're actually doing her a favor because you're giving her money and a good time and you're taking her out the street for a while. But the reality of it is today, well, one, we just know that story is not true. And two, the reality today is because of the internet, because of the technology and the apps and everything that you have accessible from your pocket, you can buy and sell and do commerce, from anywhere you are. And we say this often, but it's so prevalent and so easy that you can order a child for sex and have them delivered to your hotel room just the same as you would order a pizza.
Yeah.
Like that is the reality that we've slipped into. And so again, how does law enforcement think that? I mean, how would they even know where to look? How did they, what we typically see is they're still thinking about that red light district and what's out in the open. And it's more of a passive approach where they can drive by, they can see something. But if it's happening online, it's happening behind closed doors. That's where we have to bring resources. And that's why Deliver Fund exists. And it's pretty exciting to see the technology and how that's developing, because we are getting to a point where we have the most robust database specific to human trafficking. And because of that, we can start to implement that into different industries, whether it's banks. We've been working with banks. We've had accounts seized because of human trafficking activity in banks. We are now getting to the point where we can do this at the point of sale. If somebody's buying a hotel room for the night, they've got to give personal information. And if that ties into anything in our database, we can get to that point where we can, and again, we say counter human trafficking, just like counter terrorism.
Right.
Why do we say counter? Well, because all these other groups, when we started, they're anti-human trafficking. Well, yeah, we're all against human trafficking. But like, how do you stop it?
Right.
How do you block it? Right. So again, counter meaning block, stop, and deny territory. That is what we're doing in this market. And we're doing it in different industries so that at the end of the day, human trafficker can't even do business. They can't put their money in the bank. They can't buy an airplane ticket. They can't buy groceries or whatever. And that's really cool to have the technology in this world at the same point in time when we're really coming in to fight this. So we don't, we can leverage that, and we don't need nearly as much manpower when we can leverage the technology.
I don't know if you've seen the documentary "Don't Fuck with Cats" or not, but
no.
Okay, I know it sounds funny, but it's about a emerging serial killer who's posting his videos, and because he posts videos of him killing cats, people civilians light into it, and they're like, okay, who is this guy? And they take something that the police would never have time to do. But this is sort of a crowd-sourced analysis, where people get obsessed with this. And if you've got 10 people obsessed with anything you do, and they want to expose it because it's something bad, good luck to you. You're gonna have a real problem. Anyhow, they do, because of Facebook, because of this group. They find this person and ultimately stop him before it gets too crazy. But how much of that because there must be people who are passionate about human trafficking. Are they networked, or do you guys alert the police to look into these groups?
That's a good question. I think that when we started this, the first little fundraiser video that we ever made, I said this because it was true at the time. Like 5 years ago, there's I don't know, 1,500 plus organizations across the U.S. that are all doing quote unquote anti-human trafficking.
Right.
So but what does that mean? Like, what is the impact of that? Like, the market's still going exponentially up,
Mm-hmm.
And then here we go, fast forward a few years down the road, and you have, the Jeff Epstein story, right? I mean, that's massive. That's a big story, and there's a lot more to unpack around that. But the reality is, like, that's a big name. There's a couple other big names that were arrested on allegations of human trafficking this year. And so it's starting to be in the news to the point where people are saying, wait a minute, this is actually happening. Wait, this is actually so, but now it's changing the conversation a little bit to say, yes, do you have different ethnic groups who are being exploited in a massage parlor? Absolutely. But is the story of human trafficking in the United States based on like shipping containers and people coming over and shipping containers or being smuggled across the border? And that's just a small fraction of what it is we're talking about. And I think really changing the narrative so that people understand that, you know what, your daughter is at risk. And if you are fighting human trafficking somewhere else, that's great, but that does nothing to protect your child,
Right.
you know, or your grandchild or your niece or your nephew. And so having more people start to realize that it's a local problem and getting engaged. Yes. When we get engaged, I mean, look at the Mothers Against Drunk Drivers or something like that. It was,
Yeah.
you know, a group of moms that were just like, I've had enough. This is not okay. And like, boom, you have a whole movement, you know.
Right.
This is the same thing. This should be that for everybody. But first, there needs to be that level of understanding and education of what the actual problem is. And then secondly, and again, I'm very biased on this because of my background, where I come from, and knowing how to fight an illicit market, there's so many organizations, so many people that are only focused on helping victims or maybe fighting the demand side somehow, right?
Right.
And again, the way that this has been fought over the last 10 years has had zero impact on the market. And what people have been doing is they've been treating symptoms, not treating the cause. So when you are helping victims, that's awesome. That needs to be done. However, you're going to help more and more victims if you don't treat the cause. And so the other side of that is law enforcement. The way that they've been fighting human trafficking is very much the Chris Hansen To Catch a Predator style, where they put out a fake advertisement online and they get a bunch of would-be purchasers that come in. Well, the amount of purchasers is so massive, and there is nobody that can give me yet a scalable solution to fighting that. Yes, we need to raise the penalties, but ultimately, like I said before, the way that you really curb this market so that there is the best prevention model, so there is no human trafficking victim, is to not have a human trafficker.
Yeah.
Once you raise the risk in the market so that you can start to accomplish that, then you can focus on, you know, how to help men be better men, you know, to not do these things. But that ship has already kind of sailed. I mean, we have pornography today. Somebody just told me recently, this blows my mind, because I have a 1-year-old son, but they said that the average age of boys that are starting to watch pornography is 8 years old.
Wow.
Like, you and I didn't grow up in that era. Like, there was no, you know, like, we want to look at a dirty picture. It was probably in a gas station, in a magazine that was like had a wrapper around it that you couldn't really see, and it was behind all the other magazines. You had to be of age to even go back there and like buy that magazine, you know. And now it's available on a phone. Like, my kid is 1.
Yeah.
He's 1.5 years old. When he was like 6 months old, he almost had my 6-digit code figured out how to get into my phone. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, he just like figured it out. Like, it's crazy how you know, adapt they become to this technology world that we're in. But there has to be some serious look at how to keep that in check for our kids. And even just yesterday, flying back from Florida, my wife was sitting next to me and she was like looking at the TV monitor right in front of us. And it was basically a video. And I think they actually blurred out some of the naked scenes, but it was basically like showing an orgy, or it was literally a movie about some brothel.
On
and
an
it was
airplane.
like 20 on an airplane, and there's a child sitting in like 2 seats over that can look, and they might not hear, but they can see everything that's going on. Like, at some point we have to protect our children, you know, because if a boy is 8 years old and he thinks that that's how you treat women,
right,
you've just created a cycle, a system that now lends itself to human trafficking, because we're like, well, whatever, like that person is essentially a commodity. Like, There is no, it's dehumanizing them, right? And then the girls on the other side of this are like, well, this is just normal. I mean, now you're talking about like a total moral decay of society where just everything else in society starts to crumble.
Yeah. Yeah, everything becomes available. So what's taboo, and they just keep pushing the bounds. I was thinking about I was actually in Dallas at the Blaze Studios, and Glenn Beck was telling me the story of how uh by luck they figured out that their kid was being groomed over
Yep.
PlayStation or Xbox or whatever it was, via gaming. And so the predators have gotten more clever, and think about how one-on-one that is. And the young mind is so impressionable. He there's any number of stories where the young kid who's been groomed is turns against the parents, that they don't understand, and the love and all of these things. This is happening while your kid is playing games on the tablet, on the phone. And I'm not saying don't give your kids tablets, phones, and games, but understand the
You got to
threat
monitor.
the threat that's out there. Good grief,
I give you two examples on that same issue because just recently, so Glenn Beck and their foundation supports us, and we've talked to them a lot about this. And a very similar story, I think, is we actually had somebody in a different state, but the child was about 15 years old, a boy. He was on a gaming station, and over probably a 6-month period, somebody had built up a relationship and built up rapport. Grown man from another state. But he doesn't know who that person is, right? He just thinks he's found a friend online he's playing games with. So this guy builds up rapport, shows up to his neighborhood and says, "Hey, come out of your house. I'm here. I want to visit with you. I'm like 2 blocks up the road." So kid walks out of his house, goes up, hops in the guy's car, takes his phone, throws it out the window, and off he goes. And within 24 hours, he's back in a different state. Only because that family was able to reach out to us, and we were able to work with law enforcement. We were able to recover that boy, and within about 24 hours. But it's not the first time that guy was doing that. And again, that's a boy, not a girl. And so, like, just thinking about like those things are out there, and if you're not monitoring, that's a problem as a parent. The other thing is, I've got a friend here in Dallas who is got a daughter who's like probably a sophomore, I think, in high school. And he gets all of her notifications to Instagram and different things that she's on sent to him also. So every single day, here's a girl who's again, 15, 16 years old.
Yeah.
And she's getting solicitations from grown men who are finding her online, asking her, to send naked photos, or they're catfishing her somehow. And they're just like, it's so prevalent that just because she has that account and she's a good looking younger girl, like there is people in her school that are known to her that are asking for those kinds of things. There are people that she doesn't know that are finding her and asking for that. Like, it is just a different world. And if you're a parent, you have to be involved in that, because those threats are very real. And a lot of it is coming in through social media.
Yeah, it's well, first off, thank you guys for the work that you're doing. And boy, so where do people go to donate? Because obviously people are going to want to be able to kick in some funds. What's the best spot?
Yeah, the website deliverfund.org is great, because you can learn more about what we're doing, how we're doing it. Also, you can sign up for a newsletter on there that we put out monthly. We're not going to send you a bunch of emails, but monthly we'll give you an update of some success stories and just kind of where we're going in the future. So that's helpful. It keeps people involved, and it's really easy to donate on there. And this is an issue that is, we're at a point in history where we can change this market. We can change the dynamic. And we believe that properly resourced, we can reduce human trafficking by 80% in the next 5 to 7 years. And so this market that's been going exponentially up, we believe with the way that we're approaching this, and obviously in tandem with law enforcement, we can reduce that by 80%. There's a lot of low hanging fruit that we can go after. And just by implementing that risk, there's also going to be traffickers that just fall off the spectrum there. So we have a very impactful solution, and you can read about it at our website, and then just be in touch with us. So you follow our Instagram pages, our Twitter pages, our social media pages, and we'll continue to try and get better at keeping that message coming out.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess what I would ask the audience to do is, in general, when you hear about human trafficking or these things, put the words "deliver fund" in whatever kind of post you put up, because it's going to do two things. It's going to create an awareness so that potential traffic customer, the person who's going to use that, realizes that there is more threat, and that maybe that's just enough to get them to say it's not worth the risk, and they don't use human trafficking that day, but also to let the police departments know, hey, there's a resource, and we can get someone here qualified and trained up on how to at least know how to access other resources and enter into the database and that kind of thing. Because, Jeremy, I mean, just because you're a small town doesn't mean that you can't send a guy for a course. And if nothing ever happens, at least someone's there who has the pamphlet, who has the binder, who can open up and go, what do we do now? And then they can respond. So police forces knowing about this, and also predators knowing about it, that, hey, we're looking for you. We're coming for you. We're going to train as many people as we can. And, down to that financial trail, like how we chase terrorism, where we look like that looks like terror money. We now have the ability to grab that money, halt it, and then look into, it causes like a check where that organization now has an eye on it, and there's an extra action. The same kind of thing can happen with these human trafficking things. But this network, like you said, has to be built now ahead of the problem so that it can be contained. Because you think about, like, kidnapping is not really a real crime anymore for the FBI in general. There's not really landmark kidnap cases like there are in other countries. But that doesn't mean that people aren't taking kids and doing things with them. It's just a different way of looking at it now. So, whew, man, that is a hell of a problem. And I really appreciate you guys leaning on it. I had no idea.
Yeah, it's something that most of us didn't. And until you really start to look at the problem, again, think about it like this. It's an illicit market. So unless you're involved in it somehow, you probably don't really know what's going on, So, law enforcement is ill-equipped with, a way to fight this. So really it's something that, we fill that gap. We have solutions all day long. And, it's pretty exciting. I mean, I don't do this because the main reason I wake up in the morning and I'm excited is because I know that it's not a whack-a-mole problem. I know that we have a solution. And if we can just get that solution, like you said, in front of the right law enforcement, in front of the right people that can help fund it for law enforcement, it builds this capability that can crush this market. So yeah, definitely #DeliverFund, #CrushingEvil. That's our deal.
Well, listen, I appreciate you coming on. Next time I'm in Dallas, I'm going to pop in and do a visit. Let's do an update show.
For sure. I'll even run you through a case study and show you kind of what that technology looks like. You'll love it.
Yeah. I will.
And okay. Well, thanks for having me on.
I love it. Yeah. Well, I mean, look, I'm a counterintelligence guy. I want to go out and I want to collect. I want to understand it so I can explain it better and help you guys out, because, I've got a voice, I've got a platform, and I don't want little girls. I've got a daughter, I'm not an animal of a human, at least anymore, so I want people to be in a better spot. And I appreciate you guys for doing this. Anything else you want to add?
No, man, I just really appreciate you taking the time to address a topic like this, because it is a heavy topic. But like you said, especially you and I are kind of getting in that time of our life where we're looking for purpose. We want to be very purposeful with our time, and have high impact. And this is something that, people need to know what's going on. I think as a society, we can really start to turn the corner. But it's got to be addressed. People have to not just look away, right? Because what I'm telling people is there is no longer a neutral. If you're just going to be neutral on this subject, that's the same as aiding and abetting. So, get with it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, man. I appreciate you.
Thanks, bud.